What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
Sean Covey, it's great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome, man.
Thank you, Ryan. Good to be with you.
A fellow college QB. I don't get many of these, Sean, so I have to start there. You were the starting quarterback at BYU, led the team to 2 bowl games, named most valuable player by ESPN multiple times. So it's not like you were just on a roster. You were the guy. Talk to me a little bit about your career playing quarterback at BYU and maybe some of the leadership aspects that you learned from there that you now use in your everyday life.
Yeah, sure, Ryan. And it's kind of a rare breed, right?
Yeah.
Having played quarterback in college. It was a ride because BYU had they still have such a history, right? Zach Wilson just got, drafted number 2, but they've just got a history of quarterbacks. So I grew up right here, 5 miles from BYU, watching all the great quarterbacks, and remember watching Jim McMahon and, before that, Gifford Nielsen and Mark Wilson. They all played in the pros. And then I got recruited by a lot of different schools. I almost went to Stanford, but in the end, I couldn't leave my hometown. Went there to BYU, and Steve Young was a senior when I was a freshman.
Oh, wow.
I got to play under him, watch him for a year. He was phenomenal. And then I finally got my shot in 1987. And first time was on ESPN against Air Force, who was having a great year. And I was able to do well and, had a couple-year career before I blew up my knee. But it was great. I mean, I think maybe the main thing I learned was just how to be, it's just such a high level, as the amount of preparation that goes into a game, the amount of thinking and everything is really extraordinary. And so one key thing I learned was doing hard things is really good for you, and putting yourself outside of your comfort zone. I was so far out of my comfort zone sometimes, playing against Texas on national TV, and but when you do hard things and do something that is way outside of what you're normally doing, your zone expands, right? So after playing football, my comfort zone went from here to way out here, where things aren't as hard anymore, right? Other challenges seem so much easier after playing football on national TV a few times. That was one key thing. The second key thing I learned was probably the importance of a system. Why does BYU have great quarterbacks? They have a great system. In terms of how they do practice every day, and I couldn't believe when I got there, every single throw you make in practice is filmed and you have to review it the next day. I'm like, what? It's crazy. What's going on with this? And the way we would run routes, and the coaches would stop the play and say, get over here. You ran 10.5 yards. This needs to be at 12 yards. It messes up all the distance between the receivers. If you aren't running this exactly right, let's do it again. Right. And just the systemic approach they had to teaching you how to read defenses is what made BYU a great system. So those are some of the things.
And so was this before the Covey name was kind of world famous, or was it happening around the same time?
Yeah, it was about the same time, because
wow.
7 Habits.
When did 7 Habits come out?
It came out in 89.
Okay.
So I was the quarterback 87, 88 at BYU. And my dad published 7 Habits in 89. So he wasn't well known at all till that book came out. And then, it became a global phenomenon.
How did that change so you're still in college, you blew your knee out, but you're still in college. How did that change your life?
I didn't even notice it.
Did?
Well, my dad was just my dad, and I was still young. I thought he was kind of funny and weird, and you know how it is when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And but over time it really didn't take off for a while, and then suddenly in the in the 90s, late 90s, it really took off. And but my father's a really down to earth person.
Mm-hmm.
and he was kind of embarrassed by the success of the 7 Habits. Like,
Really?
yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I knew it was good, but I had no idea
Huh.
it would be, best-selling business book of its kind of all time. And but he was my father's a really humble person, and he was thrilled but surprised by the success.
So what did that teach you in that moment when you see this thing just exploding and you see the humility still shown and not getting a head so big you can't walk through the door? How did that impact you as a leader, both at work and at home?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that my father was just really genuine.
Mm-hmm.
So what you saw was what you got, and he was as good as he was as an author. He was an even better husband and father. So he was congruent, and you could see. I'd get up and see him speak in front of 2,000 leaders and just blow them away. And it was so genuine. There was no technique. There was no, I'm going to try to blow them away. It was, I'm going to teach them these truths about the power of principles in the work setting, because I know they work. And because he's so congruent, there's no hypocrisy. He's not a perfect person, of course, right? He's got his flaws like anybody. But generally speaking, he was so congruent that it'd give him power and integrity, right? And you could feel it in his teachings. So it taught me that. It also taught me that, he would spend so much time with presidents and cabinets and trained all kinds of people, leaders from nations. And he was never blown away by anybody, because he'd always come back and say, yeah, I know this person leads a $5 billion organization, but they're really kind of messed up. And they've got some family problems he's trying to work through. And he basically would say, everyone's got issues and problems. Doesn't matter what kind of title or position or power you have. We're all humans. We all have kind of the same challenges. And I don't know, it kind of taught me that not to be a respecter of persons. He would treat the barber who would cut his hair, which he didn't have much of, exactly the same as he'd treat, a president of a nation that he was meeting with. And you'd see this as a kid, and you'd say, okay, well, that's how it is, right? That's how we should treat each other, is not because of title or position or power or wealth. Everyone is an amazing human being. The most sacred thing in the world is the person sitting next to you.
Yeah.
Right?
I learned this. I remember I was recording with a guy named Brian Koppelman, who's created movies and TV shows. And after we got done recording, we talked about the fact of growing up with a dad. And I grew up with a dad who introduced me to a lot of, I guess you could call them powerful people based on title. And Brian did as well. His dad was a senior exec with a record company. And he said, I sense that you've been taught how to speak with powerful people in a way that you both feel kind of normal and be respectful. And I didn't really think of it that much. I guess it just became natural. I sense that from you, and the fact that you treat the person who is coming here to pick up the trash can and take the trash out the exact same as you would the president of a nation, because at the end of the day, we're people. And I think, though, there are some listeners, maybe, Sean, I'd be curious to get your advice on this, that for whatever reason they get nervous, or they don't know how to speak, or they just bow down and defer to someone because of a title. What advice would you give to them to not do that, to learn how to communicate and behave in the setting where there are people that have power?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that exactly, but it's probably, I always try to think, and I'm sometimes I get a little intimidated by who I'm meeting with and speaking with, and I always just try to think about, what, they're a person. You strip away all these titles and power, and they've got probably the same kind of challenges I do, maybe worse, right? And then I always try to think about their family, right? And it really humanizes things. Like, I wonder what it's like with your, how's your relationship with your spouse and with your teenage daughter? And And also start talking to people when, if you're ever in a tight situation, you got to talk with someone with a lot of power and authority, talk with them about their family and watch how they'll lighten up, loosen up, become more real and genuine, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because, the family experience is so common among all of us.
Yeah.
And what you have surrounding you has nothing to do with these relationships. So
I remember, Sean, talking to the guy who's a billionaire, and we were talking, and I asked about his, he had some daughters, and I asked about them, and he goes, "Oh my God, this morning it was a disaster." And he just goes into the story about how, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like last Tuesday for me, where
right,
we
yeah.
have the same type, because you're trying to get them ready for school, and it didn't work out, and everybody's mad, the right clothes, you know what I mean?
Right.
And in a way, we bonded over the fact of like, oh yeah, we deal with the same stuff, waking up, having breakfast, getting them on the bus,
Totally humanizes everybody, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about family problems.
Yeah. So Sean, I want to shift gears a little bit, because a number of pieces of your work have impacted me, and I want to focus on one specifically.
Okay.
A book that you originally wrote with some co-authors, but it's also now been updated and re-released, called The 4 Disciplines of Execution, or 4DX. And 4DX is something I implemented in a job I had years ago. I remember, because I read the book and it just knocked me back. So I'd love to focus now for, let's think about an avatar, a person who is leading a team within a business, and maybe they're not the CEO, but they're not an individual contributor. They're in some sort of mid-level management role, and their team may be doing fine, but not as excellent as they need to be, or they want to do.
Yeah.
Can we walk through these 4 steps, these 4 disciplines of execution? Maybe first broadly, you could describe exactly kind of the purpose behind 4DX and what it's all about.
Sure, Ryan. Well, it started with us doing a survey about 20 years ago at FranklinCovey, and we asked leaders of organizations, what do you most struggle with? Number 1 was execution. It wasn't getting a strategy or setting goals or dealing with people. It was like getting things done as an organization. So that's where it began. So we began a quest to try to figure it out, try to crack the code on it, and feel like we discovered something over many, many years working with thousands of work teams. We discovered something that works. So the 4 disciplines is a methodology for getting things done. It's a methodology for achieving a goal or getting great outcomes. And it doesn't matter if you're leading a team of 5 people, or leading a project, or leading a massive organization. The principles work at any level. So that's what it is. It's a time-tested and proven set of practices that work every time, because they're based on principles. So that's kind of the origin.
Let's start and go in order. Okay. Number 1 is focus on the wildly important goals. Explain what this means.
Yeah. So that's the first discipline, focus on the wildly important. And it basically means this, that we all have far too many initiatives and goals we're trying to get done. And we've learned that if someone's got typically 15, 20 goals, initiatives, they'll get nothing done. If you narrow that down to 1 or 2, we tell people you can have 2 at the most, maybe 1. One's better, maybe 2. You've got to narrow your focus, or people are doing way too much. And it doesn't mean that you can't have lots of things going on, like an air traffic controller has got planes flying all over the place, but they land one at a time. And as business leaders, as a leader of any kind of organization, you've got to learn to land one plane at a time, put a disproportionate focus on that one thing, or you'll never get it done. So a quick story. We were working with a multi-billion-dollar company in Texas. It was an analytics company, and we met with the CEO. They were having a lot of struggles, 115,000 employees. And we said, what are your top 3 goals? And he listed his top 3 goals, boom, boom, boom. And we said, well, what percentage of your 110,000 employees do you believe understand those top 3 goals? He goes, everyone does. I talk about it every week. I send an email out all the time. We had a big kickoff meeting. And then his direct reports came in a few minutes later, and we said, without being prompted, we're going to ask them to write down what they think the top 3 goals of the organization are. And he's like, oh, okay. So they write them down. They come back. There's 27 goals, right? That if you added them all up, a few overlapped.
Yeah.
They were all over the place. And we said, well, this is why you're struggling right here, is no one really knows the key initiative you're trying to focus on. Another quick example, in the 50s, NASA came out with their Lead the World in Space Exploration strategy, right, with Eisenhower. And the Soviets were kicking our butts at the time, and they said, we've got to go after this. And so they came up with this big plan about leading the world in space exploration. And they came up with their 15 paragraphs of all the things they were going to do, beautifully written, right? So ethereal, so broad that no one knew what to do. Nothing happened. We got further behind. John F. Kennedy comes along in 1961 and says, our goal in space is to get a man to the moon and back by the end of this decade safely. As soon as he narrowed that ethereal 15 things down to one goal, man to the moon and back by the end of this decade, a starting line, a finish line, and a deadline. Okay, every goal needs to be written from X to Y by when. As soon as he said that, it galvanized NASA like never before. And you read the history of this, and they were never so engaged as they were during that time. But suddenly they had a goal to go after. So immediately, disproportionate focus on that one most important thing. They figured out life support, propulsion, navigation. We've got everything else figured out. These 3 we can't do it. Let's figure these out. All that energy goes on those. They figured out propulsion and life support and navigation. Navigation is like hitting a bullet with a bullet, right? It's really hard. And getting off the ground, gravity, making it into space was difficult. They figured out 1969, year to spare, they land on the moon and back. We had no business being on the moon in 1969. And there's more technology in this phone by like 100-fold than everything in that lunar, So it was an incredible example of focus, right? So focus on the wild important is the idea that I promise you, usually you have far too many goals if you're leading a group. Narrow it down to the 1, maybe 2 things that have to get done.
It's kind of like, I remember, Sean, the first time I set out to do we're going to write down our values as a family exercise. I did this with my family.
Yeah.
And by the end of our exercise, we had 25 core values. Well, we had no core values if we have 25, right? If everything's important, nothing's important. I think that's a good lesson to learn here. Real quick before I get to number 2 on goal setting. Okay. I go back and forth on this, and sometimes I'm not sure what's best.
Yeah, sure.
Because at times, if someone asked me like, what was my goal for my show or my business or whatever, I wouldn't have been able to predict any of the stuff that has happened. But what I have worked on has been really diligent about what I would say is the lead measures of being prepared, of regularly reaching out to speak with compelling storytellers, of being good about follow-up, like a lot of, like, I think the process-oriented aspects of doing this well, but not really thinking about an end result or an end date. What's your process? And when you hear me say that, like, what's your thought process? Because the JFK one is a beautiful example, right? It works great. Yeah. But what do you think when comparing and contrasting goal setting and how people should do this?
Sure. Well, it's a good question, because I think sometimes you need to be kind of flexible, right? Yeah. Especially with big life plans. I've noticed that I'll set some goals, and then a year into it, like, things have shifted. And sometimes, like,
what type of goals do you set for yourself? You mean business, personal, both?
Yeah, I set business goals of kind of organization I want to build and how big it is and that kind of thing. And
Right.
You know,
So like
goals for
growth goals, like we
family.
want to be this size. We want to, right.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you've got to be flexible. You've got sometimes you have a deliberate strategy. Clayton Christensen uses this language. You know, he's the great Harvard professor that
Innovator's
wrote
dilemma.
about Innovator's Dilemma.
Yeah.
But he talks about two kinds of strategies for your life. One is you have a deliberate strategy, which means I'm going after something. Another is the idea of an emergent strategy, which is something that knocks you off track. You weren't expecting it. So he uses the example of, he always wanted to be the editor of the Wall Street Journal. That was his goal, right? That was a deliberate strategy. He was going after it. But then as he was pursuing that, someone came to him. He went to Oxford, you know, was on track to go right down this lane. And then someone came to him and said, hey, I've got this part-time job at Harvard, and you'd be a really good professor there on a part-time basis. And so he kind of took it part-time, and then it went really well. And he started thinking about his theories, and then suddenly this emergent strategist wiped out his Wall Street Journal idea, right? And he ran with this. But then once he was with this new career at Harvard, he developed a deliberate strategy for what he wanted to do at Harvard, right? So I think the idea is, it's great to have a deliberate strategy, but be ready for the waves that might hit you. That might knock you off course to something maybe far better or more purposeful for you, right? So an personal example for me is I'm working at FranklinCovey, the company my dad founded, right? Which has become a public company. It's not a family-based company, but and I'm focused on, you know, the enterprise side of the house. But then I run into a school, an elementary school, that transforms themselves completely from a school about to be shut down, public elementary school from Raleigh, North Carolina, to the #1 magnet school in the country with extreme poverty and 27 languages spoken in the school. And my deliberate strategy was thrown out the window. And I've said, I'm running with this. I'm going to help bring this methodology they're using in their school to the world. We have it now in 5,000 schools. It's called Leader in Me. But that's a good example of kind of, it's fine to have a deliberate strategy. These are my plans, but be ready to have a wave sweep you that might take you in a far better direction for you, that you're more passionate about and more aligned to.
Yeah.
Sometimes a tragedy will set you off on a new course. Sometimes a great success will. Sometimes just an experience can do that.
It not only like be ready, but I think it's about putting yourself in the position for that wave to hit you, right? So it's almost doing your work with excellence over and over and over. Well, I have found, and then the people I've studied, I feel like if you're focused on that emergent strategy, you just don't know, but you want to give yourself a shot. And that's how I felt about approaching. Okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm either going to do it with excellence or I'm not going to do it. And then, like, it's a series of those decisions. And then that can create some of those emergent waves that knock you off the surfboard or whatever into something that's better. Right.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the 4 disciplines are not a life goal. It's not a big strategy for purpose. It's like, you know what, I'm in this situation right now, and we need to solve this problem. Typically, WIGs, a wildly important goal, is somewhere, it's like a year or less. They're kind of 1 year or less goals that, where you just say, if we kind of get this done, you know, nothing else really matters.
In the corporate world, like, what would be some examples of a WIG, a revenue target, or what would you say, a product release? What are some examples?
It could be we've got to increase revenue from X to X by when. We've got to increase market share this year from, 5% to 9% by December 31. It could be, we've got to, in schools, we've got to increase reading proficiency from 55% to 75% by May 31st.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha. So in the way now let's go to number 2. which is the golden rule of execution, and that is act on lead measures. You have to identify what those lead measures are and then act on them, the actual day-to-day actions that lead you to accomplishing the wildly important goal. Talk to me more about acting or creating and identifying and then acting on the lead measures.
Sure. Yeah. So once you've kind of defined, this is my focus, then it's like, you've got to define and discover the lead measures. We say act on the lead measures because they're different than lag measures. Lag measures are where most people focus their time, and they're not helpful. So if you're trying to lose weight, you weigh 200 pounds, you want to get to 180 pounds. If you're acting on the lag measure, you just weigh yourself every day, right? Like that's not going to do anything. If you're acting on the lead measures, you're going to track your diet, you're going to track your exercise, how many calories you're burning and how many calories you're bringing in. Mm-hmm. And those would be the leads. For a salesperson, for example, oftentimes people don't know what to do with sales. How do we increase sales? Well, maybe we should track them every day, right? And that's just looking at your lag measure every day. It's like weighing yourself. A lead measure you might discover is face-to-face meetings each week. I run a charity, and we have to raise $1 million a year to keep it going. So our lead measure is, we know that if we want to raise $1 million, we have to ask for $5 million a year. So we break that down by week and say, we need to ask for $100,000 every week. And that's our lead measure. So we meet every Friday, and how'd we do last week? Well, we didn't ask anyone this. Well, we're not going to hit our lag measure, right? We're not going to hit our $1 million unless we do our lead measure of asking. You got to put yourself in a position to ask, right? And so it all backs up, and we start doing this. And after a while, you get into a rhythm and you realize, man, if I want to hit that goal, I've got to do this lead. So that's what leads are all about. And most, again, I want to say most, I'm talking like 95% of businesses focus on lag. They've got lags everywhere.
What's the number? Yeah, that type of,
right.
Like, yeah, what's the revenue number at, when it's like, what about all of the behaviors that lead to the, my background, in corporate America has always been in sales jobs. So that's why I think of that. And I remember when 4DX got implemented where I was working, when I read the book and then wanted to do it, this was the most critical part for me, because exactly what you're saying, the stack rankings were sent every day. So here are the sales, here's number one, here's the last person, here's everyone in between. Which the biggest change that needed to happen was, first we had to identify, what is it? Let's deconstruct what it means to be excellent in this role and sell and exceed our number. What are the actual day-to-day behaviors? And so it was like a big research project for me to study over the last few years of the day-to-day actions of the people who hit it. It took a long time, but once we figure that out, not just one person or two people that could be these lone wolves that are really good for what odd reasons, but you have to get a feeling for just the job in itself, and then study that, reverse engineered what excellence looked like in the role, figure out the lead measures, and those then became kind of the metrics that we measured, the metrics that mattered. And that's how we more systematized, as you're talking about, they did at BYU with their offense and their quarterbacks and their practice. Same thing. Takes time, but I think it was worth it to implement, especially of identifying and then acting on those lead measures. And then next, it leads to the third one, which we also did: keep a compelling scorecard. Why is it so important to make sure that there is a compelling scorecard?
Yeah. Well, same reason why it's important to have a scoreboard at a football game. No one cares that people play differently when they're keeping score, right? You just watch a pickup basketball game anytime. You can tell if they're keeping score or not by the intensity of how they're playing.
Watch 6-year-olds play soccer. I did last night with my daughter. When they start keeping score, the girls play different. 6.
I know.
Right? Yeah.
So it's the same idea. No one knows what the score is typically in businesses or in teams. Like, how are we doing? Well, not sure. And so the idea of a public scoreboard is absolutely key. Just to have and you got to have a player scoreboard. It's not a coach's scoreboard, because a coach will look at 300 stats, right? Especially after a game, studying every kind of thing. The NBA, they've got so many dang ways of measuring people's efficiency now. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But what players need to see are how much time, who's ahead, who's got the ball, and that's about it.
Yep.
So create public scoreboards in your business that show your key lag measure and your 2 or 3 key lead measures, and that's it. And you got to be able to tell if you're winning or losing within 5 seconds. So they need to be public, they need to be simple, and they need to tell you if you're winning or losing in 5 seconds. So we teach people this. And again, most people have way too much data, right? And so it's not motivating. As soon as you create a public scoreboard, it's engaging. The other day, I got to tell you the story, Ryan, it's hysterical. I went to lease a car. My lease ran out, leasing a Nissan Murano. I go and get a new lease. I'm meeting with the guy, and he goes, "Oh, you're from FranklinCovey, I saw." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Have you ever heard of the 4 Disciplines of Execution?" I said, "Well, I was one of the co-authors of that book." He goes, "Oh my gosh. Well, I'm the GM here, and it reinvented my previous dealership. And I did so well there that I've got this one, which is failing. And in 2 months, we're turning it around." He goes, "You got to come back here." And he went back and showed me his public scoreboard. He goes, "Here are all my salespeople. And here's how they're doing, the number of cars sold." And he said, "And here are all their lead measures." And he goes, "For the first time, everyone knows exactly what they need to do to sell one car." He said, "No one knew what they were doing before, but it's all tracked right here on the scoreboard." And he goes, "This is totally motivating. They're coming back here all the time. I got people that quit. They're coming back to sell again because they know to get one car sell, they have to do 200 touch points between email, social media, and phone calls. And here they're all tracked. Here's the emails, social media, phone calls. They had a couple of items, I forget. And he said, and they've learned if they do 200, they get a car sell. So that they know for the first time exactly what to do to sell a car. And sales are going through the roof. It's all public here, and it's a healthy competition.
Yeah.
And it's making all the difference.
So
that's the idea.
What about when it's not? Like, I think the world of sales is more black and white than most jobs. What about when it's, and I lean towards that because that's what I did, but that's not all the end all be all. There's a lot of people listening, Sean, who don't work in sales. I mean, I believe everyone's always working in sales every day. You're always selling something, ideas, yourself, whatever. But let's talk about outside of people who don't, like, they don't carry a bag, they don't have a quota. What about what's a good example maybe for that person? They work in product, or they work in strategy, or they work in finance, or something else of keeping a scoreboard, the lead measures. I think that's important.
Yeah, it is. The thing about it is there'll be natural scoreboards that come up in any function that you're in. Just ask yourself, what's the WIG? So if you're quick example, Alamo colleges in Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, okay? Group of 5 colleges, 30,000 students, just got, a couple years ago, got the Malcolm Baldrige Award, first of its kind ever for community college, okay? They came up with a wildly important goal after a lot of thinking. It wasn't easy, but it was increase number of certificates and degrees earned. And here's what happened. And then Bruce Leslie, the chancellor, said, "Okay, everybody, this is our goal." And so how do you do that if you're in facilities? Right? So the facilities team thinking, what's our scoreboard? A couple hours into this, they're meeting as a team. Oh my gosh, we can do so much to increase degrees earned. Look at the areas we're in charge of. Are they comfortable for people to study in? What can we do to improve study areas, right? What can we do? And so they came up with their own scoreboards. The head guy went back and showed me these scoreboards they came up with, right? And facilities to increase degrees earned. And then the health department, right? The health clinic there said, why they start thinking about this. What's our scoreboard? Well, how come people are dropping out? They're dropping out for all kinds of reasons. Why do we always wait until they drop out to go and meet with them and try to help them? Let's identify the at-risk students now. Let's meet with them now to prevent them from dropping out later, because they typically drop out for emotional reasons, right? Social emotional reasons. I break up with my girlfriend. I have a fight. It's not usually academic reasons. And so they came up with their own scoreboard of meeting with of identifying all the at-risk students and saying, we've got to meet with every one of them by before Thanksgiving this year, right? Mm-hmm. They have their own scoreboards, totally engages them. So you just ask yourself the question, here's the wildly important goal of the group I'm working with, right? And every function has a different angle on it. Product development, what can I do?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm going to have milestones I have to achieve. Those are my lead measures. I got to hit this milestone by this date so I can launch on this date, which will help the overall goal of launching, increasing market share. So that's the idea.
Yeah. I think too, from a leadership perspective, one of the roles is to help people. So especially if you're at the very top and you set this big vision or mission, or you set the wildly important goal, to work with those leaders and teams to help them create their lead measures, to help them create their scoreboard, so that they feel a part of it. They feel they're going to be empowered and bought in to what it is, and what is my role.
Right.
They may think, well, I'm just a random employee. No.
Right.
This is actually my role, and this is how we keep score. And I can actually see it. It's right there of how I'm contributing to this giant goal that seems well beyond me. I think that's, from leadership perspective, that's what I'm thinking of our job as leaders, is to make sure we help people understand their role to us hitting our wildly important goal, as well as how we're going to keep track of that and the cool parts of the scoreboard. I think that's really important, and which leads then, Sean, I think to number 4, create a cadence of accountability. Right, holding people accountable. Yeah. Talk to me more about creating a cadence of accountability.
Yeah, we did a survey, hundreds of thousands of people one time, and asked, how often do you meet with your manager to discuss your goals? And well, the question was, I meet monthly with my manager to discuss my goals, and 15% could say that. So the reality is there's not a lot of accountability. And when there's accountability, it's typically boss to subordinate, right? Which isn't the best kind. The best kind of accountability is we hold each other accountable. It's team-based, it's culture. You committed to do this in the team meeting last week and you didn't do it. And your peers are looking at you saying, come on, we're all in this together, right?
Does that happen at FranklinCovey? Like, is this party, are these meetings like they happen in your meetings?
Yeah, we recommend, we call it a WIG meeting. We have them every week, wildly important goal meeting. It's different than a staff meeting. A WIG meeting is look at your scoreboard, look at your lead and lag measures, and ask yourself, how can we move the needle? What needs to change? And we make commitments, right?
And people are holding not you as the top dog, but others are holding each other accountable.
You don't need to say a thing when you're the boss and there's a scoreboard and we're all looking at it and somebody kept their commitment or didn't, right? They won't miss it the next week.
A curious question about football,
Yeah.
Sean. On the best football teams I've ever been, I've been on winning teams that won a lot, and I've been on teams that had losing records. As a quarterback, that's painful to admit, but it's true. Right. Look at the records there; you can see it. The biggest difference between the teams that won and the teams that didn't, obviously we had talented players, but outside of that is the players on this team where we won held each other accountable even more so than our coaches. And this team, players had kind of infighting and didn't really do that. Yeah. And that's what I noticed. And in a way, I'm grateful for having the experience of both ends of that spectrum of winning all the games and losing too many games. It's because the team cared enough to hold each other accountable. And I felt like I can't let them down. I'm
Right.
committed to this. And I think that was a big aspect to why we won so much, as well as why we also lost so much on the teams that weren't winning. What do you think about that?
I think it's right on. I think it's exactly right. I think when it's just pressure from your boss, no one likes that either way, right? The boss doesn't like it, you don't like it, and there's always going to be some pressure there. But if you can create a culture on your team where, hey, we're all holding each other accountable, we're in this together. I can't fail because it's going to bring you down, and vice versa. That's magical. And I'm telling you, if you have a goal you're rallying around, our goal is to reduce the cost of manufacturing this piece by 25%. And you've got a team and here are the lead measures. Here are the behaviors we have to do on a weekly basis that will get us to that goal. And here's our scoreboard to see how we're doing. That's what creates that joint accountability. Is the public scoreboard does. If you don't mind, just a quick other story, Ryan, is so we work with schools with 4 disciplines. So Marriott hotels across the world uses the 4 disciplines of execution. You can go to the person running the restaurant and say, show me your wildly important goal. And they'll take you to the back room and say, here's my wig. And like you said, it's powerful because they developed it. It wasn't handed to them. It was like, hey, we want to increase customer satisfaction. What's your part of that? And they get together. Watch the brilliance of those 15 people running that restaurant, right?
Yeah.
They'll know exactly what to do. It's local knowledge. It's democratic, right? It's not top down. So anyway, we do this with Marriott hotels. We do it with 5,000 elementary schools across the world. One elementary school, Martin Petitjean Elementary in Louisiana. It's pretty much all poverty in the school, 100% on free and reduced lunch, and they figured out their wildly important goal was attendance. If we could only increase attendance, it would change everything. We'll work on math scores and reading scores later. If they just come to school, that will be more than anything else, right? So they start focusing on this, make a public scoreboard, have weekly accountability, where they review it every week. This last week we did this, every class reviews it. The kids are meeting with each other every week. They hold each other accountable. They have accountability buddies. So one class, Mario, he's in 2nd grade. He wakes up, 2nd grader, wakes up one morning. His mom won't wake up. She was at a party late and she won't get up. So he remembers he's got accountability that day for their attendance in their class. He goes out on the freeway and hitchhikes to school. Some trucker driving by sees this little kid, had seen him before because he lived in the area, picks up the kid and drops him off. When they drop him off, they say, what is the kid's name you're dropping off? And he doesn't know it. Principal comes and says, who are you? And he told what happened. And then she went and interviewed Mario. And she goes, Mario, you shouldn't talk to strangers like this, number one. But why did you want to come to school? And he goes, because, our goal is 98% attendance and I couldn't blow it. Right.
Wow.
And so he had hitchhiked to school. And even though it was kind of a dangerous situation, it just shows you the kind of motivation people get when there's accountability and a public scoreboard. But that school did phenomenal. They shot up on their attendance. The next year, they applied it to reading scores, proficiency, unbelievable gains in reading proficiency. Using the same methodology.
Sean, what about for there's a leader listening now who's like, I love this, I'm in. But their culture is not really one built of holding each other accountable. It's more top down, your boss to the employee type accountability. What are some of the ways to embed this into the culture? I know it doesn't happen overnight, but what are some ways to get us started on that path to get this into the culture?
Well, I would say start with, the idea of no involvement, no commitment. if I were a new manager and coming into an organization, let's just say I've got 15 people on my team, I'd sit down with them and say, okay, here's what our company is trying to achieve. What is our role in that? Let's come up with a wildly important goal. And I would take a couple hours and I would debate, and as a team, we'd come up with something, and I'd try to put it into an X to Y by when format. And I'd just start with one thing. There's a day job that will always be there. Just to keep the lights on, you got to do certain things. Mm-hmm. Those don't go away. But we call that the whirlwind, right? And that's why most people don't get goals done as a team, because you're so busy just keeping things afloat, doing all the reports you have to do already and such, that it just keeps you away from doing that one thing that might make all the difference, right? Like improving attendance. But you got to kind of have to pull out that most important thing out of the whirlwind and say, we're going to give this some time and focus, maybe 20% of our time. 80% is going to be keeping the business going, right? I would do that first. I would have probably another session where I would do the same thing on coming up with the lead measures. They're hard to find. They're oftentimes hard to find. You got to dig deep, like you talked about, leading a sales team. Mm-hmm. Have the team come up with scoreboards. Again, so you're building all this together, and then setting up a cadence of accountability on a regular basis. And just you watch how this changes cultures. We set out to design the 4 disciplines to help achieve a goal. What we found is that it did that, but even more so, it created engagement off the charts.
All this done as a group. It's not the leader saying this. It's not the leader saying, here it is, and they just kind of lay it on the table.
No. You'll have your ideas, and you can veto. We always say, don't dictate. You can veto, but don't dictate.
Got you.
If the team comes up with something that I don't think that's going to work, then veto it. But don't come in and say, I've come down from Mount Sinai and here's our goal, right? It's not going to work either. And watch the creativity of people. And I always try to align your goal with everybody has somebody above them, right?
Right.
We're this department that's part of this division. What's this division's goal? Going to align it to that. You might want to go to that person and say, what's most important, right?
Right. I found too, when I'm handed the goal without any say, I'm not nearly as excited as when I played a role in creating the goal, even if it turns out to be the same thing. Yeah. I've done it. I've done it both ways, as the leader and as someone who's been handed that goal. And I've also messed up and just handed it to other people. And I found when James Kerr, who wrote Legacy, says, the New Zealand All Blacks, who he studied for a full year writing that book. And he just talked about the fact that they're all about empowering them to set and create their own goals, because you're more apt to achieve and exceed a goal if you set it yourself. Yeah. And so I know that's not always perfect and possible. I get it. There are going to be naysayers saying, oh, you don't understand my company, Ryan. I get that. I've heard those emails, but I'm saying if at all possible, empower, bring the team along with that goal setting process. And I think the chances of hitting it, exceeding it, go way up if they're involved, as opposed to being like, here you go, find a way to get that done.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we know these principles work, right? No involvement, no commitment. I mean, the principle of focus, the principle of no involvement, no commitment, the principle of people play differently if they're keeping score, know how you're performing really quickly, right?
Yeah.
The idea of you've got to hold each other accountable. It's team accountability instead of boss to subordinate accountability.
Sean, can I take a left turn before we finish? Because I have to, as a dad. You also have written the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. A lot of people listening have teenagers, or they will. Yeah. I know we're not going to do a debrief of the entire book, so I'm just going to hit it quickly now. What are some general pieces of advice for parents who have teenagers if they want them to be effective at life?
Yeah, well, I wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens when I didn't have teens. They were young. And now that I have them, I take back everything I said.
You sold a lot of books, man.
No such thing as an effective teen. But yeah, the book is about these principles applied to teenagers, the 7 habits, and
Mm-hmm.
teaching kids, hey, take initiative, have some plans. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind. Think win-win. Always think about mutual benefit. And it's just packed full of stories of their peers, basically failing and succeeding, right?
Yeah.
But what I've learned as a parent is, having worked with teenagers and parents a lot, I had to narrow it down to a few things. I'd say, one, have a purpose as a family. I think like what you did, Ryan, is it doesn't really matter what you come up with, but come up with a family mission statement or a set of family values, or what is our family all about?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one key thing. And it's kind of maybe corny and hokey, and your kids will laugh at you when you say it the first time.
For sure.
But we developed one. And it's just a one-liner, and it's it's on our wall in our family room, and it means a lot to us.
What's it say?
It's personal.
Oh, you can't share?
Well, I can share it. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the idea of is living for the grand reunion. Basically, it means we're all part of one family. I lost a daughter a few years ago. She's 21. And it's the whole idea of all being together again, living in such a way that we can all be together again, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. But I think that's that's one of the key things I've learned is develop a family mission statement or set of family values and stick with it. We did it when I was a kid. My dad said, hey, we're going to write a family mission statement. We all laughed. He said it again. We laughed again. I said it the third time. We started developing one. We came up with one. And it was about basically our home as a place of fun, relaxation, learning, growth, where we can all participate and something like that. But it didn't matter what it said. It was the process we went through that made the difference. And then the second thing is have one-on-one times with your kids.
Yeah.
You just got to discipline yourself to do it. And you have family time with everyone, but have one-on-one times too. That's different when there's 2 versus 3 people. And just find a regular time, like to say, I'm going to do a date once a month with my teenage daughter. And what do you want to do? Oh, you want to go to this concert? I'm not looking forward to it. I'm going, right? Or whatever it might be. Those would be the 2 pieces of advice I'd have for parents.
It seems like just having being purposeful and intentional with that, and then it's a commitment. I think you have to commit like every day, just like with your relationship with your spouse. It's a daily commitment that takes work and thought and effort. And if you just wander around not really having a purpose or a mission and you're not committed, well, no wonder that things aren't going to go well a year from now. If that's what you're doing, it's because of those 365 days of not having a purpose or being committed to it. I think that's a big part. My big takeaway from what you're saying of how to do that. I know it puts you on the spot, which is a tough question, because all of us here as parents are like, I can't give any parental advice. You don't want to follow me, but no, I really appreciate it, Sean. And it's just been fantastic talking with you. One more final question, which is, there are a lot of people who are now current college graduates, and they're going out into the world. They want to leave their mark. They want to positively impact other people. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you'd give to a person at that stage of life?
Yeah. Well, I've got a daughter who just graduated from college last week.
Wow. Nice.
Son that just started.
Okay.
So I don't know. My general take would just be, I think have a plan for sure. Have a plan of what you want to do, and then be willing to change your plan too. Mm-hmm. Something new comes along or something better comes along. I think that would be one key thing. Live according to your principles. Have a set of values, write them down, have a personal mission statement. And again, have a credo of your own. I do this with teenagers all the time, and we have them go through a mission statement workshop where they develop a personal mission statement. This can be a very powerful thing. They have to go dig deep and kind of determine what is their voice. Voice is the overlap of what you love to do, what you're good at doing, where there's a need in society, and your conscience. Because sometimes your conscience is like, what is life asking of me, right? Well, what is that thing that I've always felt I needed to do? And sometimes it's, you ask yourselves questions like this, and like one lady said to me, I feel like I'm the glue that holds our extended family together. That's what life is asking of me, is we've got lots of problems in our family, and I'm the peacemaker, and I'm going to play that role, right? But I think that's what voice is, and if you can find, it sounds like, Ryan, you've found your voice doing this show, what you're good at, what you love to do, where you can make a difference, and where your conscience says you need to be, right? If you can find that sweet spot, that's a beautiful thing. And so just be in search of your voice, look for places, and have that be your criteria. It's more around contribution. I think if you think about, instead of just looking at money and these kinds of things, look at what kind of contribution can I make? What can I make the greatest contribution? Those would be some things I'd keep in mind.
Oh, beautifully said, Sean. I really appreciate you being here. I highly encourage. I've personally implemented the 4 disciplines of execution, so check it out. It's worth your time, as well as Sean's other books. You can see them all out there. Thanks so much for being here, man. I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
Oh, I'd love to do it, Ryan, and we can keep talking football.
Talking football for sure. All right, man. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you. Take care. We'll see you.